Welcome back to another episode of Hey Bub Outdoors. Good to see you again. Adam and Matt here. Matt has just gotten back from Colorado on a DIY elk trip, and we wanted to give the top 5 things he's learned as a first-time DIY elk hunter in Colorado. Top 5 things you should know before you go out on an elk hunt, not just in Colorado, but probably most of these things apply to anywhere, right, Matt?
Yeah, I would say any out-of-state hunt. So if you're looking, especially if you're from the Midwest or East Coast and looking to head west for some kind of out-of-state hunt, these would be great tips and things that I've learned over the past couple of years as I've prepared. So yeah, any state would be applicable here, I would say.
Yeah, Matt, I don't think this made your list, but before we get started, I mean, let's just let's get to the nitty-gritty. TP or wipes? I mean, what do you take out there?
That's a good question. So for me personally, TP all the way.
TP. All right.
I don't want to mess anything up. Just do the same thing at home as I do in the woods, so it's.
Yeah, those long trips, those are always the questions I come to. It's like, what kind of battles am I going to fight and not realize when I get out there? Once you break the rhythm.
Wipes are heavier, so.
They are heavier. That's right. Well, awesome, man. Let's dive right in. So let's just hear from you. What are the 5 main takeaways that you took from that trip? I know you guys saw a lot of beautiful things, kind of got the lay of the land, but what are your main takeaways?
Yeah, so I think the way I'll kind of address it is some of the things that kind of were my biggest questions as we were preparing, because just the thought of going and doing an out-of-state hunt can be a pretty overwhelming concept in general. There's so many logistical things that you kind of need to think through. And so, I'll just kind of start from my list. And the first one being, you need to figure out where you want to go. And so maybe you already know that you want to go to a specific state, or maybe you're still trying to figure out, okay, which state or which species do I even want to look at? For me and my buddies that we went with, so we knew we wanted to do an elk hunt, and that kind of limits your options when it comes to over-the-counter tags. So Colorado is like basically your only choice as an out-of-stater to get an over-the-counter tag, from just Walmart or wherever, and then go out and hunt. So that's kind of limiting your choices. Other states will do like a lottery, or you have to get points and all that stuff. And so decide where you want to go. And kind of built into that, it can even be overwhelming once you decide, okay, well, I want to hunt elk in Colorado because that makes it easier for me, and I can do that right away. It is kind of like just figuring out what unit you want to hunt in can be a little bit overwhelming. We found that, a lot of people were just saying, as I was researching, a lot of people were just like, just pick a unit, because there's so many different options. Like, you're going to drive yourself crazy trying to e-scout, every different place. And so we use tools like Go Hunt, which is super valuable. They have a lot of good information, not just in their map tool, but also like videos and blogs and stuff. And then Onyx and Google Maps. And we kind of narrowed it down that way. We found an area that looked like, okay, this terrain is something that we can do, and wasn't too far from a major city, which just makes it nice in case, for whatever reason, you need to run into town to get something or whatever. And so drill down your specific area then using e-scouting, which is kind of what we did. And a huge component of that is making sure that there's elk habitat or deer habitat, if it's a muley or whatever that looks like for you. Kind of like if you already used to e-scouting for whitetails or turkeys or whatever, just use the same kind of concepts. They apply, but obviously different terrain. So that was the first thing. And then the second part of that is decide who you want to go with. So maybe someone's already approached you. In my case, a friend of mine and one of his friends from church that I didn't know at the time, we're both kind of talking about it, and they approached me and were like, hey, Matt, like, we're thinking about going elk hunting. You want to join us? So obviously I knew my friend right away. I knew he would be a good person to go with. I've whitetail hunted with him for years. But you want to make sure that you find people that you like and you trust that you could spend a week with. For us, we drove from Pennsylvania to Colorado, which was about a 20 hour drive. So make sure that you're going with people that you can have a good time with, who are going to be positive, who are committed to putting in work, because let's face it, it can be really tough, especially in some of the Rockies and other really mountainous areas, just hiking to a spot. So make sure that those people are willing and full in to put in the work and the effort that it takes, especially if you do have success and get an animal. Getting it out of the woods is just a grueling effort. So, and then the other thing is just make sure no one's a downer. Make sure there's no negative Nancy in the group. Sorry, all you Nancys out there, if your name's Nancy. But I think that's a huge part of it.
Do one of those dude perfect stereotype elk hunting videos.
That's probably true. I wonder if they already have one, but if not, yeah, I mean, there's definitely some stereotypes out there, I would say, just in our encounters. But yeah, I mean, you have to make sure that the people that you go with are folks that you get along with, you can joke around with, they're going to keep things lighthearted when it stinks, because sometimes it stinks. So, and then one of the third things I think, and this is a component that there's a ton of resources out there on, and maybe some of you already have some level of fitness, but training for the hikes and packing an animal, whatever that might be. So for us, we Pennsylvania, I think where we are, we're about 1,000 feet elevation, and we drove out on a Friday. We got to Colorado on a Saturday evening, and right from that first night, we were at 9,500 feet elevation. So there's just a cardiovascular demand for oxygen, right? So it's right from the get-go, even if you're not backpacking yet or hiking or anything. And so once you start hiking around, that can quickly catch up to you. And so there are a lot of resources. Trying to think of some of them. Mountain Tough, I think, is one. They have entire fitness programs around, making sure that you're in shape for backcountry hunts. Because
is that a lot of high intensity interval training? Is it a lot of intense cardio, like short spurts, or is it more endurance based?
I think they give a good variety. So I think they kind of mix it up so you get a little bit of everything, but a lot of it is based on building strong legs. So a lot of squats and just having a lot of weight on your back with pack workouts and stuff like that, rucks and all that. But also, running, playing basketball. They kind of if you have something that you like to do that's cardio involved, just go do that. And then maybe once you actually get closer to your hunting trip, 2 or 3 months out, you can start actually training specifically for the pack workouts and stuff, where your muscles, like your shoulders and your back and your legs, are getting used to all those weird motions of carrying weight on your back. Because oftentimes, we would train, just do a couple mile hike with 40 to 70 pounds just in your pack. I would literally just take dumbbells and wrap them in towels and put them down in my pack and just go for a hike. And so it is kind of crazy. You have to get those muscles used, especially your traps and your hips and all that are kind of working things that they haven't worked before. And so there's definitely a requirement of fitness that you don't necessarily have to have for whitetail hunting, for example, or turkey hunting,
right?
Because you might be changing a few hundred feet to 1,000 feet in elevation easily in a day. So that's a huge aspect of it. There are one thing I'll just throw in on the altitude note real quick is all three of us, the guys that went, took a supplement. There's a couple different brands that do it, Wilderness Athlete and Mountain Tough, or is it Mountain Ops, I think. It's an altitude adjustment supplement. Basically, it helps move the oxygen through your body more quickly, apparently. So at least that's what they claim. And so we all three did it. And I would say that our symptoms were pretty minimal, considering came from flat ground to 11,000 feet 3 days in, and we all hung in there pretty good. So if that's something you're looking at, you might look into the altitude pills as well. Because I don't know that, it could be like a placebo thing, but there's a lot of good reviews on them. So I think it probably does have some credibility there too. And then one of the other big pieces, and this is one, so I'm kind of passionate about this and probably to a fault, is the gear. So I actually really enjoy looking at gear, even if it's something like a hobby I'll never get into. Sometimes I'm like, oh, that gear is cool to me. Though I don't know, I find it interesting. But when it came to elk hunting, you basically need a whole backpacking kit. So the first thing, the most important thing you can have is a pack, one that fits well. You don't want to go cheap on a pack, because a cheap fitting pack you'll feel it, all day, every day if you're not getting one that's fitted for your body correctly. Mystery Ranch, QU, Exo Mountain Gear, they all make really good ones. And inside that pack, you need basically enough stuff to keep you alive for the week. So a good sleep system, down sleeping bag. As I'm saying this stuff, also keep in mind, this all is weight, right? So every single component that you build out has to be somewhat lightweight in order to keep you from being miserable all week long. And so for us, down is a good sleeping bag option because it's lighter, more packable. Obviously you need a pillow, a sleeping pad, all that stuff. And then one huge thing, I'm a huge advocate. I know that First Light, some people have negative opinions of how expensive First Light can be, just because it is pretty pricey stuff. But their merino clothing, I wore the same exact shirt all week long, was a long sleeve merino shirt in, for literally 24 hours a day for 6 days, 7 days maybe. And that thing did not stink at the end of the week.
No BL.
Maybe like the slightest hint, but if you let it dry out in the day, it goes away. Same thing with my socks. They were merino, no smell. I wear merino boxers, no smell. So merino is huge. It keeps your weight down because you have to bring less clothing. It's really good at regulating your body temperature. I know a lot of people are like, wool in the summertime, no thanks, but it actually does a great job of regulating your body temperature and keeping it somewhat even. So highly suggest merino clothing so that you can bring less. And a good pair of boots is another huge thing. You want to find something that fits your foot really well. If you're going to be in rocky terrain, doing a lot of side hilling, stuff like that, you want to make sure that you have something that's kind of stiff, more stiff, so that it's able to take on some of those rocks under your foot and not cause huge pressure points and stuff like that. But biggest thing is make sure that it fits well. So before you go on your trip, don't buy a pair of boots the week before and try them for the first time on your trip. Like, you need to be getting some miles in, making sure that there's no hot spots or blisters and stuff like that, because that could add up to be pretty miserable really quickly on your trip. And then other than that, I have a gear list that maybe we can post or something, Adam, so that people can get to it to kind of see what I used. I even broke it out by like the ounce to get an idea of how much the weight would be and stuff like that. But a couple of big things I'll point on just real quick are water filtration. It's extremely important because you can't bring enough water for the week. So you have to find water sources that often aren't the best. And in our case, we found literally like a cow pond at one point because we were really running out of options. And so we had to filter basically cow water. It was pretty gross. Food, that's a whole nother animal, making sure that you get enough calories. I think they normally suggest, obviously, depending on body type and stuff, like up to 3,000 calories a day-ish. And then one other thing I'll say is that you can actually, because it is very expensive to acquire all this gear, I would say if you're thinking about doing it, maybe, plan it out 2 years in advance and start buying piece by piece, just little by little. Use Facebook Marketplace or whatever to buy used gear, because a lot of the newer stuff, like you can get a good sleeping bag or sleeping pad. I don't know if I'd buy a used sleeping bag. Not sure how I feel about that. But a good sleeping pad or tent or something like that, and save a lot of money doing it that way. I actually
Right.
bought my boots on Facebook Marketplace. They were like $400 boots, and I got them for like $160. So,
Sweet.
and they had never been worn. So, there's lots of opportunities to save money like that too.
I wonder too, man, if like if some of the stuff, you could kind of buy every time you went out. So like what if you bought it, and then sold it for almost what you got in it, right after, and then your goal
Mhm.
is to go back in 4 or 5 years or whatever. I mean, some guys go
Yeah.
out every year and it wouldn't make sense, but I'm
Yeah.
just thinking about, and I wonder if there's any like gear rental companies for some of this stuff, like some of the packs and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Did you come across that at all?
So at least on the East Coast and Midwest, I don't think there's many companies that do gear rentals. And the only problem I would have with doing it when I get there is I've never used it before.
Right.
So, but I actually, and throughout this process, I'm thinking like, there's got to be a business idea here for someone to I don't know, to like rent out gear, like a website where like you can rent something for half the or maybe a quarter of what it actually costs or something. Because even doing that, basically what's going to happen is a lot of guys will use it once and then it may sit in their house or whatever for years.
Right.
For me, I plan on doing some backpacking and stuff, so I plan on still using the gear. But yeah, the other good part of the gear side is like you can buy the stuff and then sell it, like you said, because a lot of the stuff holds its value really well.
Yeah.
And one other thing I'll throw out there is in terms of the gear, it's it's fine and dandy to look at like hunting related content when it comes to gear, but especially for the camping, like backpacking stuff and your stove and all of that, I would actually suggest looking at like backpacking YouTube channels and things like that that do reviews on gear. And for me, like I was really focused on like the budget aspect of it. So, best budget sleeping bag for blah, 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 or best budget tent for one person, that type of thing for backpacking. There's a lot of good content, and those guys really have it figured out. I would say even more so than the hunting crew does. So, um, that's definitely a suggestion. But yeah, I would say that's true about the gear. What you said, you can just buy it and sell it, and then if you want to get an updated model a few years later, do the same thing again if you plan on going back out. So, and then just one last thing that I'll mention in terms of preparation, which I think is probably a given, but also easily overlooked and can get bogged down with the rest of the planning. It's practicing your craft, and so if you're a bow hunter, if you're going to go out during archery season, make sure that you have a good arrow setup that you can count on, um, that you can shoot in the situations that you want to, and make sure that you have practiced enough to shoot a tight group at 20, 30, 40 yards. I know a lot of Western hunters will go out past that. For me, I was kind of going to hang around that 40-yard area as my max, just because that's what I feel comfortable with.
Would you mind sharing your arrow setup for everybody, man? What do you got?
Yeah, yeah. So right now I have shooting a gold tip Hunter XT 250 spine arrow, just regular three fletch blazer, and then in terms of broadheads, I have it's made by a company called A Bowyer. It's a 250 grain single bevel broadhead. It's I think 2.5 inches, 2.25 inches long, inch and a quarter cut diameter, I believe. And thing hits so hard. It's
It's an adult
unreal.
That's an adult arrow setup right
It's an
there.
adult arrow setup for
Plan B
sure.
arrow.
Exactly. Smoked a doe with it for the first time last year, and it went through like butter and then buried in the ground on the other side. So love that setup. And I do actually have for the gold tip arrows, you can actually use they sell a tool. It's basically a long Allen wrench that you stick through the nock side of the shaft, and you can screw weights into the back side of the insert inside the arrow shaft. So if you wanted to increase your weight by, I don't know, 30, 40 grains, something like that, you could actually buy their weights and they just screw right into the back. So I think I have around 20 grains. I would say overall my arrow is a 620-ish range, I think, something like that. So yeah, it's definitely heavy. So, and the other part of practicing, not just with your bow, is for elk. Obviously, they're very vocal animals. Not so much in our case. We didn't even see any elk while we're out, but saw everything else: muleys, pronghorns. We encountered a really awesome black bear, cinnamon black bear. But regardless, it was a great time. And but elk, generally speaking, the strategy for hunting them typically, as long as they're not super pressured and quieting down, is to call them, right? So bugling, cow calls, all that stuff. So I would highly suggest, getting a call. Maybe you don't want to get a diaphragm call for your first time out. I ended up doing it because I just wanted the challenge. I thought it was fun. And already had some practice familiarity with like a turkey call. So it's pretty similar, but making sure that you can sound like an elk and sell it. There's a lot of good resources out there for that too. So practicing your craft, I would say shooting your bow or rifle, just getting your rifle set in if that's what you're going to do, and or muzzle loader, whatever it might be. And then also making sure that you're able to practice calling and get pretty good at that too. So those are kind of my biggest 5 things. I think it's a big pill to swallow when you first start thinking about doing an out-of-state hunt, especially for a species that you haven't hunted before. And so, I'm happy to answer any questions. Obviously, I'm no expert. That's definitely the case, but I think regardless of whether or not you harvest anything, you learn a lot through the process. And I think that I definitely, even just having gone once, have the experience of like, at least I know what things worked for me and what didn't, and what things I would change. And so I think for the most part, my gear worked well. Preparation was pretty good. Obviously, you can't be too fit, right? And the people I went with were great. And so I had an awesome experience just in that regard. But yeah, highly recommend it if you get the opportunity, and start saving up now, I will say.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, Matt, that's definitely a bucket list item for me. I'd love to do a DIY elk hunt out either Colorado or Wyoming or New Mexico, somewhere out west. So
yeah, totally different animal out there. It's beautiful. Yeah.
Awesome, man. Well, hopefully what Matt shared is going to be something you can consider when you think about possibly taking an elk trip on your own. Who are you going to invite? Where are you going to go? All the gear, all the fitness that's required, and then just the practice that goes into it. And Matt, that's a great foundation for folks to jump off on. So thanks for sharing, man.
Yeah, of course. Happy to.
Yeah. All right, guys. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Hey Bub Outdoors. We'll see you again real soon.
Take care, y'all.